What is up, everybody? This is Clint Lamb, and that is a special guest, Jimmy Stein from Locked On Bama. Fantastic YouTube channel with Luke Robinson. Can't recommend their channel enough. But Jimmy, I appreciate you coming on over here today to talk a little bit of Alabama spring football. First of all, how you doing today, brother? It's been a while. We used to do this, quite a bit.
Yep.
Things change, but I feel like we're for at least. It's not a reunion tour, but it's a reunion concert, and I like the concept. You doing all right, brother?
Oh, absolutely. Doing great. It does feel like a reunion show. I hope we haven't forgotten all the lyrics.
That's a great way to put it. I highly doubt that we have. We still talk from time to time, and obviously we're in the same circles covering Alabama football, and there's a lot to discuss or talk about. Obviously, we saw what happened last year with 9-4 record. Nick Saban, his first season at Alabama had, obviously a lot of losses. But then from that point forward, Alabama fans weren't used to seeing a 4 in the loss column. So that was a little bit different, maybe left some anxiety. But as we get into spring practice, we got some storylines that we're going to touch on a little bit. But I first wanted to kind of get your reaction to how you think things are trending with this team as they try to kind of enter year 2 under Kalen DeBoer.
Last year, I really think it was such a, you had to anticipate one of the craziest transitions of all time, because you're not just talking about one coaching staff to the next. You're talking about replacing the greatest coach in the history of college football with a guy from somewhere else, a guy that was not on the Saban staff, that didn't have a relationship with Nick Saban. This was going to be bumpy, and that probably should have been foreseen better than it was, even by maybe people like us. I mean, I think we should have known, hey, this is probably going to be rough in spots, but it's also going to look good in spots because the roster still was a talented bunch. I think last year was largely about Jalen Milroe, and I mean that as a compliment, in the sense that I think the season was going to go as he goes. He was kind of the holdover. It kind of felt like Kalen DeBoer was coaching Nick Saban's team, and Jalen Milroe was the quarterback in Nick Saban's team. Okay, now we moved on. I feel like this year is about Kalen DeBoer, and I'm not saying, hey, the jury verdict is going to be rendered in 2 years, and what happens after that doesn't matter. I'm not saying that at all, Clint, but I do think this is the year we get a real look at Kalen DeBoer at Alabama. What will that look like? How will he do? And we're going to know a lot more about Coach DeBoer's chances for big success at Alabama this year. He doesn't have to win at all. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that we will get a better idea of what Kalen DeBoer's hire is to Alabama after this season. Last season was just about transition and Jalen and Kalen coaching Nick Saban's team.
You're 100% correct. I mean, talent matters. Alabama had talent last year, but was it the right fit as far as some of that talent? Whether it be for Kane Wommack or for Kalen DeBoer, and you're breaking in a guy who had a little bit of offensive coordinator experience, but not really. That was a new working relationship between Kalen DeBoer and Nick Sheridan. Now you've got Ryan Grubb coming back. That's been a huge storyline. So it's like it just feels like that what you're going to get from a product standpoint is a lot more in line with what I think Greg Byrne and company were expecting when they made the hire in the first place. Going into last year, we thought, okay, the one thing that Alabama's going to be able to bank on pretty much week in, week out was the offense. That was hardly the case. I think there's numerous reasons for that, but I agree with you. I think Jalen Milroe was a massive part of that just because, when things were on for him, not really a better maybe a couple of quarterbacks who were as good, but I don't know if you could find really a better quarterback in college football. Definitely Heisman caliber. But when things weren't really going well for him, or he kind of wasn't on his game, a lot could fall apart rather quickly. And so Alabama, they benefited from him being a part of the offense, and they kind of paid the price in some ways in some games. But let's talk a little bit about the quarterback battle now that Jalen Milroe has moved on. Ty Simpson is a guy who everybody, being the returning player, everybody says he's waited his turn. Some people think he kind of should be handed the starting job. Don't know what your thoughts are on that. Would love to hear them. But then you've got guys like Austin Mack, who's familiar. He's the only quarterback who is both familiar with Kalen DeBoer and Ryan Grubb. And then you've got a guy like Keelon Russell, who is the most talented quarterback, at least from a high school recruiting standpoint, that Alabama's ever signed. Kind of what's your thoughts on the quarterback battle as you start to transition from the Jalen Milroe era the last 2 years to what's kind of lying ahead?
Yeah, I think the good news is there's three interesting candidates. I don't think this is a situation, Clint, where it's like Alabama has to make do. It's not that at all. I think all three guys are immensely capable. All three guys still have a chance at being great quarterbacks. I include Ty Simpson, obviously Keelan and Austin with their ages. You know, they have a lot of football in front of them, but I think all three guys have a chance to be great. It's just a matter of fit and comfort in the scheme. Uh, I think obviously Ty has a leg up here due to age alone. I think we probably don't talk about age enough when it comes to college quarterbacks, but Ty has some experience. He has some maturity. He's had time with Kalen DeBoer. He's had time in this program. And people forget because, recruiting is a lot like Christmas. Everybody likes what they got last Christmas, not 3 Christmases ago. And in that sense, people, I think, forget how toolsy Ty is. People love to talk about Keelan and his ability. I agree completely with all of that. I'm just saying, Ty was a 5-star too, and 5 stars are toolsy guys. Ty had plus arm talent, plus athleticism, coach's son, did really well at camp side by side compared to other quarterbacks, an advanced guy. I just think with Ty, it was always going to take a little bit of time because he didn't exactly play high school football at Duncanville and Dallas against the best competition Dallas, Texas has to offer. Ty played in kind of a rural West Tennessee situation, and it was always going to take some time to catch up to the speed of things. And maybe it took a little more time than some thought it might, but reports are good. And, Ty should be QB1 today. And I'm talking about spring of 2025. There's a lot of time between now and the fall, but Ty should be QB1 today. I think people should be excited about what Ty brings to the table, maturity wise and tools wise. And when Keelan, who I think I've got my eye on as the future starting quarterback at Alabama, Keelan Russell, when he's ready, everyone will know, sort of like how Tua made a really loud announcement in Atlanta, Georgia one night that he was ready to be the quarterback at Alabama. Keelan will make an announcement too at some point that he's ready. Until then, I'm excited about Ty. I don't think he's a bridge quarterback. I don't think we're making do with a Ty Simpson. I think he has a chance to be really good.
And that's kind of what are your thoughts on the narrative that Ty Simpson can't be very good because a lot of people feel like Jalen Milroe at times was not very good, and that another quarterback probably would have been a stabilizing option from a consistency standpoint, but yet they never turned to Ty Simpson. So that must mean that Ty Simpson wasn't as good as Jalen Milroe. And so, moving forward, it's like you should probably expect him to not be the starting quarterback. What are your thoughts when people make those kind of comments? Because we're hearing that a lot from Alabama fans and, some national pundits as well.
I hear that a lot, and I do. But I'll just say that personally, I put near zero credence in it. Personally, now I'm not saying I'm right and everybody's wrong. I'm just saying that's the way I look at it. I put near zero credence in that, just simply because Jalen Milroe due in part to the transition and due mostly to the fact that as a redshirt sophomore, he led Alabama to the SEC championship with a win over Georgia, who had won 29 in a row, led Alabama to a 14 playoff, led them to overtime of a game where they nearly beat the eventual national champions. He finished sixth in the Heisman Trophy. Jalen Milroe, due to that and of the transition and his leadership during the transition, was entrenched as the starting quarterback. I would say that how many games in a row does Joe Burrow have to play poorly before they bench him in Cincinnati and look at the next guy? I don't know, 2 seasons worth of bad games. And I'm not comparing the two at all. That's absolutely not what I'm doing. I'm just saying Jalen Milroe was entrenched as the starting quarterback, similarly to how Burrow is in Cincinnati, or Mahomes is in Kansas City, or Josh Allen is in Buffalo. He was the quarterback, period. I don't think it had really anything to do with Ty Simpson or the coach's perceptions of Ty. I think it had 100% had to do with Jalen's position as seen by the coaches on this football team. So I don't put any credence in the Ty thing. I know what people are saying. I'm not saying they're wrong for feeling that way. I'm saying I just don't see it that way myself, because I didn't see Jalen as someone that was replaceable unless he was injured. But that's how I saw it, and that's apparently how Kalen DeBoer and his staff saw it, right or wrong. So I think Ty wasn't ready to be the starter when he was a redshirt freshman, and he showed that in the South Florida game. But there's been a lot of great college quarterbacks over the years, Clint, who weren't ready as redshirt freshmen. I don't think we've really seen Ty since then, and we'll find out against Florida State most likely whether he's ready or not now.
That you're 100% right, and I am going to play a short clip. I'm just going to play the audio over my microphone. Hopefully, it comes in well. But Connor Rogers, he is on the Chris Sims Unbuttoned, podcast or what show or whatever they call it. It's on the NFL on NBC YouTube channel. And he was asked about, they were talking about Jalen Milroe, and he had talked to Tyler Booker, and he said something interesting. We've talked about it kind of before, at least on our show. I'm sure you guys have too, and just the difficulty in benching a guy like Jalen Milroe. But I want to play the clip. It's only about 20 seconds, and it's just going to be audio, but I just find it pretty interesting.
About him, I was like, because they were both the leaders of that team when they went through the Saban transition. And he was like, listen, I'll shoot it straight. He's the first one there at 5 a.m. every day. He leaves at 8 when everyone's long gone. And when we needed somebody to kind of take the reins as we transitioned coaching staffs, it was always him.
That is exactly what we've been talking about. Yeah. That's Tyler Booker, another one of the team's biggest leaders. And when he's asked about Jalen Milroe, he said when they needed somebody to kind of step up and be the guy as far as from a leadership standpoint, from a transition standpoint, it was kind of always Jalen. And when it's always Jalen, how do you bench Jalen? When he is that guy, he's respected by his teammates. He was respected for his work ethic and everything else by the coaching staff. He was that bridge or one of the top bridges from player to coach. And so when you bench him, it's like there's this – the coaching staff hadn't really been given a chance to establish itself to a point where having those type of bridges between player and coaches didn't have to exist as much. And so for anybody out there that thinks, Ty must have not been better than Jalen Milroe because he couldn't, overtake him as far as the starting job, I'm not saying he was better than Jalen Milroe. I think from a consistency standpoint, he would have been much better. The highs wouldn't probably, I almost guarantee you they wouldn't have been as high, but I think the lows, you wouldn't have seen kind of the bottom falling out a little bit. I just think that there's a lot more nuance to the conversation than a lot of people are willing to entertain.
That's exactly right. Certainly what I believe. That's why I use, it's probably a poor analogy to say Joe Burrow, because Burrow is going to be one of the all-time greats. But I just mean Jalen Milroe was entrenched as the starting quarterback, in part because of how he played as a sophomore, redshirt sophomore, and in part because of the transition. He was just entrenched. None of the quarterbacks, Clint, that finished in the top 10 in the Heisman voting last December, when they decided Travis Hunter won the Heisman, and there's the top 10 voters, none of those guys returning to college football next year will lose their jobs either. They're entrenched. That's their job, and unless they get hurt, they're going to be the guy. Garrett Nussmeier, for instance, they got some talented quarterbacks behind him. Garrett Nussmeier's going to be a quarterback at LSU. He can play bad 3 games in a row. He's going to be the quarterback in that 4th game. He's just entrenched as the starter, and I think Milroe is that way. I think a lot of fans, don't like that quote system. They want everybody's job is up for debate every not just every game, but quarter to quarter, series to series. And it just can't always work that way at every position. But I put zero credence in the Ty can't be good or he would have been in for Jalen last year. I think that's not the situation. There was not a competition at quarterback so much last season. It was Jalen's job. And now there is a competition. And I personally expect Ty to win it, at least to start the year. But I do recognize Keelon Russell's incredible skill set. And I think Keelan's going to be great one day. When is that one day going to be? Heck, it could be this fall. I don't know. But I think Ty is going to be a really good quarterback. And we'll likely find out as soon as August, was it August 30th against Florida State?
I'll put it this way. It took the greatest college football coach of all time, Nick Saban. It took a future top 5 NFL draft pick in Tua Tagovailoa, 5-star recruit coming out of high school who had that it factor from the day he stepped on campus. It took the greatest college football coach of all time, an entire season, over 14 and a half games, to finally work up the courage to bench a similar styled player in Jalen Hurts, the guy that the locker room loved, who obviously had talent, worked extremely hard, but he had shortcomings that were kind of hindering the offense at times. And you expect Kalen DeBoer to step on Alabama's campus in year one and make this declaration for the guy who we talk about Malachi Moore and Tyler Booker. Jalen Milroe was single-handedly the biggest factor as far as that transition from Nick Saban to Kalen DeBoer out of everybody. You expected Kalen DeBoer to turn around and send that guy to the bench. It was almost an impossible ask. And everybody thinks that it's just easy. Hey, it's Madden. Go to your depth chart, throw in your backup, go to something different. There are so many more nuances, and it's something that even the greatest college football of all time struggled with as far as making the decision, because that decision probably could have been made a lot sooner than halftime of the national championship game, and Nick Saban couldn't bring himself to pull the trigger until that moment with everything on the line, and then you hit the offseason. It's a really tough ask. Do you have anything to add as far as that is concerned before we move on to some of these other quarterbacks?
I'll just say that's a great point. And as high as I am on Ty, and maybe I'm higher on Ty than most are, but as high as I am on Ty, he's not Tua. So in that example, even more so, Ty is not going to be Tua. And by that, I mean, Tua, I think, may be the most gifted passer I've ever seen play at Alabama, and he was the 5th pick in the draft. I'm very high on Ty, and who knows what's going to happen, but I'd wager real dollars Ty's not going to be the 5th pick in the draft or higher. I don't believe that's going to happen, but I'm pretty high on Ty, and so the point you made is great. Now factor in that Ty is not Tua.
That's 100% right, and you know that, and that's not to say Ty's going to guaranteed be the starter. Like you didn't say that, I didn't say that. It's just to say let's not jump and make a bunch of assumptions based off of how last year played out compared to what that's not an indication of what Ty is both, whether it be a leader, whether it be as a player on the field, as far as his ability to execute the offense. It's zero indication. Doesn't mean he'll win the job. Just don't use that as the example when you're trying to support any sort of case. And that's why I say the jury's still out, because we just haven't seen enough of Ty to really know. But, Austin Mack is another one who's, he's in the competition. A lot of people, they put their focus on the returning guy, the guy who quote unquote deserves it. Ty Simpson's a former 5-star, so you got that talent factor that people like to kind of cling to. And then you got the freshman phenom who had kind of a lot of the fan base wants to go ahead and move on to, take your lumps. And then by the end of the year, you're going to have an all-star player, one of the best quarterbacks in the country. But Austin Mack, he is a guy who really, when it comes to this quarterback battle, he doesn't get brought up enough. And he's a guy who last week, reports started to surface. Hey, he's kind of probably more of a legitimate contender in this competition than, once again, a lot of people want to acknowledge.
Yeah, year 3. I mean, to me, that's big. I mean, like, for instance, last year was Ty's year 3. We didn't really get to see him. But now this is coming up. This is Austin Mack's year 3, which is crazy that it happens that fast. But I would also say this is the first season, Clint, that Austin Mack has been ready to play college football. I mean, when he was a freshman and a guy reclassified early at Washington, he was just he was just the most obvious redshirt candidate ever as a quarterback. He needed to mandatory redshirt. Now he comes to Alabama, massive culture change. There's already a Heisman candidate, leading that QB room. There's an older kid ahead of him. Last year was about Austin Mack. Again, almost a second redshirt type year, which maybe he needed at his age. Maybe he needed in the transition coming from the West Coast. He's from California, played in Washington. Now he's come to Alabama. Now year 3. Now Austin should be ready to play. And gosh, you have to love the tools. Clint, had he gone through a normal high school situation where he played 4 full years and gone to all those rivals and Nike camps and Elite 11s and all the stuff that gets quarterback attention, there's no telling how Austin Mack might be even viewed differently than he is now. I think that reclassification hurt his rankings. It hurt his perception, national perception of him. But the tools, they're 5-star-ish. I mean, in terms of the raw tools you look for to potentially be a great quarterback in this sport, Austin Mack's got them. So I'm very excited about his future. That's what I'm saying. This Alabama QB room, it's good. I'm not comparing it to the Tua Jalen Mac Jones room or anything. I'm just saying this quarterback room is good because I have a lot of confidence, Clint, that all 3 of these guys are going to prove to be really good. Will they all prove it at Alabama? When will they prove it? I don't know. I'm just confident Ty Simpson, Austin Mack, and Keelon Russell will all be very good college quarterbacks.
100%. I'm right there with you. And I do want to point out, because Austin Mack has been getting a lot of attention over the last, week or so since that report came out. The report, I think it came out on Wednesday, and it was essentially saying Tuesday was one of his best practices ever. I'm one of those where I always try to I remember when they first interviewed Ryan Grubb in, the first week of spring practice prior to spring break. When he was asked about the quarterbacks, his initial run through, I remember he spends 8 or 9 seconds praising Ty Simpson, talking about how he probably is taking the biggest step forward amongst the quarterbacks and this, that, or the other. Then he briefly, 3 seconds mentions Austin Mack and his ability to command the offense. And then he immediately moves on to Keelon Russell, and he starts ranting and raving about Keelon. And that stood out to me when that happened, because I know that wasn't the intent. But it's like you spend a lot of time on Ty, you spend just briefly time on Austin Mack, and then you move on to the freshman phenom. It was almost what everybody from a fan's perspective has been doing when it comes to this quarterback battle as well, where you bring up Austin, but it's just to acknowledge him and then you move on. But really, you kind of view it as between the other 2 guys, which is not the case. It's not the way we should be approaching it, because Austin Mack is very much in the competition. But then you kind of you step away. Everybody leaves for spring break. You come back, and then after the first practice, a report that surfaces that, hey, Austin Mack is very much in this competition. He just had his best practice. It's like, I feel like, do I think that the coaching staff is manipulating or lying about that? No, I do not. I don't think that's their style. What I do think is that there was probably, I don't know if it was from Ryan Grubb or if it was just hey, we need to make sure that Austin Mack is getting his flowers in this competition too, because you don't want him to start buying into this narrative that I'm not really in this competition. You don't want him feeling like Mac Jones was feeling back when it was Tua versus Jalen in 2018. 2018. Like Mac, I remember thinking or there was reports he was upset that he wasn't getting brought up in that conversation a lot more. And it's like, bro, you at that time, you weren't in the conversation. I'm sorry. It was either going to be Jalen Hurts or it was going to be Tua Tagovailoa. You don't want Austin Mack feeling that way, because he is in the competition. And I just thought it was very well timed to make sure he was reminded as well as everybody else being reminded. Don't forget about Austin Mack.
It'd be disastrous to lose Austin Mack this summer to the portal, because he feels like he's not getting a fair crack, or isn't in the future plans, or isn't one turned ankle away from playing. I think almost, because I've heard, hey, I'm sure you've been asked too, hey, when do you think DeBoer is going to name a starting quarterback? My answer to that is, first of all, there's no rule that requires him to do that at all. And secondly, why do that? Because the moment that you declare someone's going to be the starter, then the other two start thinking about their futures. You don't want that. Also, competition breeds quality. You want Ty, assuming Ty's the favorite to start against Florida State based on age. You don't want Ty to think, okay, job is yours, don't worry about it. No, you want Ty being pushed. You want Austin being pushed. You want Keelon being pushed. Keelon, hey, your accolades in high school haven't won you anything at Alabama. You have to beat out Austin Mack and Ty Simpson. So, no, you keep the competition going because you're creating better players by keeping the competition going. And you don't want any of the three. It's going to be a little scary only having three. It'd be real scary having only two. So you don't want anybody to leave. I do know, from inside the program. I mean, they're high on all three of these guys. They don't want any of them to leave.
That's 100% correct. That is, and anytime you ask about any of them, it's always positive things. I haven't heard one negative. And here's the thing, that's not always the case, because a lot of this stuff we don't share on the record. So it's like a lot of these people are willing to be a lot more open. Now, if we were told something negative about somebody, and then we jump on here and immediately start attacking that and talking about it, then we wouldn't get told that anymore, because that's not
anything.
Yeah. Whether you mention who the source is or not, it wouldn't matter. They're not trying to create negative storylines. That's not the point. But it kind of gives us a direction a lot of times on which way to take it. But I haven't heard anything negative. They do very much like all three guys. And it's, I was actually asked about, okay, if after last week's storyline or story that broke about Austin Mack, the question that came up on the message board at covercrimson.com was, what happens if Austin Mack gets named the starter? Is that the end of Keelon Russell? And my response to that is it's very different naming a week one starter versus him being the starter all season. Like, that's a different conversation, first of all. Nick Saban, when he named Jalen Milroe the starter heading into the 2023 season, he made sure everybody knew this competition's not over. He is not entrenched correct. And how true was that at the time? I mean, it took Jalen Milroe's struggles against Texas for them to finally get their chances against USF the following week. But that was kind of, Nick Saban at least claimed that was kind of the intention the whole time, is to get to a game like that where maybe you could give them some opportunities. That will be something that I'm sure Kalen DeBoer will say. So if you're Keelon Russell, are you really like super bummed out and you're ready to bail because you weren't the week one starter as a true freshman, knowing that is, very difficult to do? I doubt it. Now, if Austin Mack is entrenched as a starter all year and he has a really good season, and he's probably, he is technically a third-year player, so he could leave after this year. But that doesn't necessarily mean that, at that point, you would probably need to have more of a conversation, but it still doesn't automatically mean he would leave. If Austin Mack was named the starter, would Ty Simpson leave? Here's the thing. If that happens in fall camp, what are Ty Simpson's two options? He can either enter the transfer portal then. He's not going to be able to get anywhere, but then you go work with a quarterback trainer for the next several months before you can get into spring practice or the spring semester for another team, or you stick around, you keep your head down, you continue to get those practice reps, maybe the backup reps when the opportunities present themselves, and then you move on once the season's over. Being a coach's son, understanding the benefits or the cost benefit of both options, I feel like it would just be more beneficial for Ty to stick around. Sometimes out of spite, because guys are upset, they'll hit the hay, or they'll hit the road. They're kind of over it, but I just don't think that should be the automatic assumption that he would be gone, because if there was a type of guy who would stick around through that, I think Ty Simpson would be one of them. But this is why we're talking. I just don't think, unless a starter is named post-spring, I don't think you really have to worry about any three of these guys transferring, even if it's named at some point in fall camp.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I mean, as we sit here today, this sort of stuff's extremely difficult to predict, because I don't think any of the three are eager to leave or wanting to leave, but we live in an era where you're always one DM away from leaving. If that makes sense, you're one DM away from leaving. And so that could happen, frankly, for any of the three. But so you hate speaking in certainties, but there's no reason for any of them to leave in terms of, I think all three are competing for the job. And like I said, I think all three will be really good college quarterbacks. And for Alabama's sake, I hope all three prove to be great college quarterbacks at Alabama. I'm not sure in 2025 how possible that is, because I think Eli Holstein's pretty good at Pitt. I'm expecting Dylan Lonergan to be pretty good at Boston College.
That's right.
That's what 2025 is, right? So we'll see. But for right now, I just like Ty's position based on age, maturity, and experience. But Austin Mack and Keelon Russell have big time Sunday type tools, and they can be great. And either one of them will announce that they're ready at some point. Until then, I think Alabama fans should have a lot of confidence in Ty Simpson. I know I do.
100%. Let's transition from quarterbacks to cornerbacks. Someone's got to be targeted when those quarterbacks throw the football. Luckily for Alabama, though, they have two really good ones. And I know you do the roster rankings, or you did. I would be curious. You might not have it off the top of your head.
Sure.
But I ended up having Domani Jackson at 4 in my rankings, and I had Zabien Brown at 10.
Yeah.
Were you somewhat similar as far as those two guys?
I can't remember the exact numbers, but it would be extremely close to that.
So, I mean, like two top 10 perimeter corners on this roster, and it's littered with NFL talent. And that kind of tells you everything you need to know. Now, Alabama's had really good cornerback tandems in the past. I mean, even as recently as Kool-Aid McKinstry and Terrion Arnold. But I think with the way that Nick Saban plays, where he tries, it's very technical. It's doing your assignment. It's letting scheme win. I mean, you got to have talent within the scheme, but it's letting scheme win in a lot of instances. But it's not really as aggressive as Kane Wommack wants to be. Before we get into that, though, I would love your thoughts on these two cornerbacks and, kind of how you view the importance of how they fit into Kane Wommack's defense.
I thought they both played extremely well last year, even though it would have been fair to expect otherwise. I mean, Domani had not been, I'm going to be honest, Domani had not been a great player at Southern Cal. He had not lived up to his high school ranking, or that 5th star I think he was given. He hadn't been that player. He was last year. I mean, he developed into that dude last year. Zabien Brown ended up being the rare true freshman, impactful, high quality SEC player right off the bus. I know we like to think as fans that this just happens annually or all the time. And sure it does. But not often. I mean, Alabama recruits as well as anybody in the country, and they're lucky to have 1 or 2 guys per year that do what Zabien Brown did a year ago, which is proved to be a high quality player in the SEC right off the bus. That's incredibly difficult to do. I think Alabama's had a lot of great cornerback tandems throughout the Saban era, even a very recent one with Kool-Aid McKinstry and Terrion Arnold. I think these guys are right up there with them. And I do, in the sense that in terms of ultimately where a Domani Jackson will be drafted, where a Zabien Brown will be drafted, you're going to find that that's going to be pretty similar or higher than Kool-Aid and Terrion Arnold and many of the Alabama cornerbacks under Saban. Also think they're great fits in Kane Wommack's defense. Kane plays very similar, but also very different than Nick Saban's defense. And these two guys seem to get Kane's system. That's why Domani flourished at Alabama in year 1 after struggling at Southern Cal, and why Zabien was able to be impactful right away. The system isn't quite as complicated as Saban's. Maybe it's a little easier for a freshman to understand things and get out there and make plays. But Alabama has, in my opinion, I mean, I don't sit here and profess to know everyone's cornerback situation in the country. I just know Alabama's has to be, by definition, one of the very, very best. I wouldn't trade them.
Yes. What I will say about having two players of this caliber flanking out there on the perimeter is it does allow you to be way more aggressive. When you feel, I wouldn't, if they're locked down, quote unquote, and you can kind of put them on islands out there, that is less, less cover 2. You don't have to run the 2 high safety looks. You can run single high, allow them to kind of make plays. You got some rangy safeties who can help out if they really need to, but you're talking about putting them on islands, and then the other 9 guys that you have on the field, you can be way more creative. way more versatile, and flexible with what you do with them that I think really is going to help Alabama's defense, especially when it comes to, like, you can allocate more towards the run. You can allocate more towards getting after the quarterback. Third down situations, there's not going to be any sort of hesitation as far as being aggressive and taking some chances because you trust those guys out on the perimeter. And that makes it a lot more difficult for opposing quarterbacks to know where pressure's coming from when you're able to do that sort of thing. Not only that, but when you mix it with what else Alabama has, like you've got two potential lockdown corners on the outside. You got a perimeter corner talent in the slot in Deshaun Jones, who has perimeter corner experience and cover experience. Plus, you have two rangy safeties in Keon Sabb and Bray Hubbard, who also were pretty physical against the run. All of the corners, I wouldn't say any of them are liabilities as far as the run. They're all pretty physical, so not much is sacrificed on that front. It's like, I just feel like that the defense, especially on the back half, when we're talking about wanting to see more pressure on the quarterback, we want to see them be more consistent, stopping the run, some of those things. Now, last year, like against Vanderbilt, a lot of cover one. It's a simple concept, doesn't take as much communication. I think the youth and the newness of all the guys in the secondary, they were a lot more limited as far as what they would ask those guys to do. As the season progressed, you started seeing a little bit more flexibility, but for like a guy like Zabien Brown, now he's kind of locked in he's got a full year starting experience under his belt. Is it going to be perfect? No, but with Domani Jackson being a fourth-year player who's played a lot of football at this point, I just feel like they're going to be a lot more comfortable and confident to kind of get into more of the cover 2, cover 3. You're still going to see the cover 0. You're still going to see the cover 1. But I just think that's going to allow the back half, or really the defense in general, to be a lot more flexible in the things that they call, which is what Kane Wommack has always done everywhere else. Like, it was weird how he would kind of get locked in these certain games into one thing. And I think it was from an inexperienced standpoint. Jimmy, I think that kind of gets resolved in year 2 with all the experience that they have coming back.
Yeah, and last year what stood out, secondary was a massive question mark going into last year. Just think about had we known for certain last summer or last spring that the starting corners were going to be Domani and Zabien Brown, and it wasn't a projection. We just knew for certain, hey, this is how it's going to be. Alabama fans should have been petrified because Domani hadn't been good. He hadn't been a good player yet, and Zabien's just off the bus. You don't know what you're getting there. And instead, it turned out to be a strength. It was a strength. And now you've got all that experience. Wommack's defense is sort of predicated on creating turnovers. They did that a year ago. I think the ask this year now, with all that experience that you're talking about, the ability to add more to the plate, is more turnovers. Hey, create more turnovers, pick off more balls, do more things to help the defense be good. Last year, the secondary, major question mark going into the season. I don't see any reason this fall why it's not just a strength, but one of the elite DB groups in all of college football.
So true. And what I like about it is a guy like Dijon Lee, like, first of all, it's not just the top of your depth chart. Like, you feel really good about cornerback 3 and Cam Calhoun and how he's coming along. You've brought up the importance of that position. You pointed that out on Twitter. You're 100% correct. When you look at the last couple of years, cornerback 3 for Alabama has been very, very important. And so Cam Calhoun is going to be a much bigger part of the defense, as you mentioned. So that's one that they got to feel really good about. I think as far as cornerback 4, where it's kind of trending with Dijon Lee, what I like about how things are set up is, even if an injury happens to one of your 2 starters, you've got a guy who can still, you don't have to immediately say, okay, Dijon Lee is showing some really good things, but he's also now going to be forced into kind of a full-time role that's going to put him in some uncomfortable situations that he's really probably not ready for. And then you kind of get the Zabien Brown treatment last year, where he was put in the same situations and forced to kind of, trial by fire, got to figure it out. And he did not figure it out early. The offenses did not capitalize as much as they could have, as far as some of the things that were available downfield. But, even through injury, even if an injury happens, Dijon Lee won't be forced into that situation. And what that will do is, it's like Nick Saban always said, he really wanted to try to play young guys and put them in a position and only play them in situations that they were comfortable in, play to their strengths, and get them confident and comfortable before they kind of transition to being like one of the relied on guys. And, you saw it with guys like Reuben Foster. You would see him kind of in specific situations early in his career. Special teams was a confidence booster for him as far as the big hits. But, by the time you actually saw him step on the field as an Alabama fan, he was an All-American. He was just that dude. I think with the way that this is currently kind of trending, you'll see Dijon Lee. I have no doubt. How much, I don't know, because, they do rotate. But, is it going to be a huge role? Maybe not. But I think you'll see him make some really good plays because he'll be put in positions to be successful. And then by the time he actually becomes that guy, probably next year when Domani leaves, you're probably looking at a guy who immediately kind of goes from being a guy who really wasn't a starter to being one of the best cornerbacks in the country.
I think you said it exactly right. When you're like putting the coaches, putting them in a position to be successful. That's their job. And that's harder to do than many think because it's such a big team. There's 11 guys. There's 85 guys on the roster. There's 11 guys on the field. But putting them in a position to be successful, this is an oversimplification. And I realize this isn't how it works, but it's easier to think of things this way, Clint. Imagine if all you're running is 6 defenses. That's all you have. Cover 0 all the way through cover 0, cover 1, cover 2, cover 3, cover 4. And that's what you do. Well, Dijon's a true freshman. What a coach can do to put him in a position to be successful is he's only got to learn cover 0 and cover 1. That's it. That's all we want you to know. Now, at practice, you're going to get an overview of what's going on when we complicate things up a little bit. But in terms of this year, 2025, this is all we want you to know. And then when they put him on the field, that's the only defenses that they run. And that's what I mean by simplifying things and putting them in a position to be successful. If you throw the whole playbook at a true freshman and expect them to learn it by Florida State, they're not going to know any more what to do in that game than me or you would. I mean, it's just too much, too soon. Saban was a big proponent of this, only giving them chunks. Only, DBs played multiple roles under Nick. Freshmen only played one role generally, unless they were a complete freak like a Caleb Downs or a Minka Fitzpatrick.
Right.
They learned kind of one thing, and that's what Kane Wommack can do to a degree. Like, let's keep things simple, and when we put him on the field, we do the simple thing, and that's to protect him. But it's putting him in a best position to be successful because you don't want a freshman to go out there and get lit up. He may never be the same again if his confidence gets wrecked. So I think with Dijon Lee and other true freshmen generally, it's about putting them in a position to be successful. Don't put them in a position where they're likely to have really bad days, because that's hard to come back from. We've seen it. I don't know how many people watch the documentary that's on Fox Nation, and Wilkin Formby, struggled so much in week 2 last season. It took him a while to come back from that, and he was a redshirt freshman. It took him a few weeks, I think, to come back from that. You just don't want that happening to true freshmen best you can.
And sometimes you don't have a choice. Zabien Brown was one of those situations. He was put in some situations that were tough. But, first of all, I think he handled it in stride. I think he was one of those players that used maybe the fact that teams didn't capitalize on it as much as they could have. Maybe that helps because everybody kind of knew you got burned, but you didn't give up a touchdown. So people were like, they're mad at you, but they're not really mad at you. You know what I'm saying? It's a lot. It's a lot less, a lot less amplified when kind of they don't take advantage of it. But I do think that this year there's no spots on defense, probably not on offense too. Yeah, I mean, really the entire team, and this is what I like about it. You're not looking – last year you were saying they've got to have help from a freshman, at least one freshman at corner, potentially 2. You don't have a choice. Someone's got, whether it be from a depth standpoint, because you did get Deshaun Jones and you had Domani Jackson, so it's like you got 2 transfers with some experience. Worst case, you rely on those 2 guys, and there's somewhat of a transition period playing in a new system, new teammates, new communication, but you've got that experience factor. And then at the very most, you're playing a true freshman as like the cornerback 3, like coming off the bench and stuff. But they've got to help. No matter what, from a depth standpoint, there is no waiting around. This year, there's not a position that I look at and say they have to have help from Justin Hill at Wolf. They have to have help from Abdul Sanders at linebacker, or, Jackson Lloyd would probably be the one that I would say probably the most right now. But like AK Deer, you love his talent, but there's no like rush to put him on the field or get him on the field. Keelon Russell, you love the talent, but I don't think Alabama's in a position where it's like, doesn't matter if he's ready or not. We don't have a choice. They have a choice everywhere. Latsir Brooks, if he ends up being a dude in that rotation, it's because he has earned the opportunity. He's been that good. And it's like when you start seeing the roster set up or stack up that way, I think that really bodes well. I would say I will take that back a little bit. Punter is one where it's like, yeah, you're probably going to need a true freshman. But even at kicker, even though you're bringing in a new guy, Connor Talton's been around for a couple of years, so that's beneficial. But as far as offense and defense, you don't have that problem.
That's exactly right. Whenever I'm asked, before a season starts, okay, which true freshmen can end up being starters, what you're looking for is two things: fantastic ability, extraordinary ability in the player, but even more importantly, the opportunity to get on the field. Because, for instance, let's just pick out, maybe like Ryan Williams. Alabama's pretty set at one wide receiver spot. I don't care who they sign at wide receiver. They're not going to go on the field and push Ryan off of it. That's not happening. So it not only takes extraordinary talent, it takes opportunity. The good news for all Alabama fans is, like Clint is saying, I don't see that opportunity out there. I don't think there is a position where a true freshman winning the spot is a necessity for Alabama to have success next fall. I just see situations where a talented freshman like Latsir Brooks could come in and win his way into the rotation because he's simply too good to keep off the field. Maybe Jackson Lloyd's too good to keep off the field. AK Deer too good to keep off the field. Keelon Russell too good to keep off the field. Maybe that's the situation, but I don't think it'll be the situation like last year with Zabien Brown at corner, maybe the year before with Caden Proctor at left tackle, where it was like, gosh, these guys really need to come through as 18-year-olds. They're our best hope. I don't think Alabama's got that anywhere, which is great news, actually.
It is absolutely great news. This has been a fantastic conversation. Jimmy, always had a tremendous amount of respect for you. We did this for a long time. We've had and it felt like old times. I will say, and I will tell everybody who's listening, you're not going to find better coverage than what you provide over at Locked On Bama. I respect what you both are doing over there. It's a fantastic channel. Definitely can't recommend it enough. But we just appreciate you joining us for a little bit of time today, because I feel like this was a very productive conversation.
Absolutely. Enjoy talking ball with Clint Lamb so much. I literally sometimes forget we're recording this and other people are seeing it because I enjoy the conversation so much. Clint's absolutely one of the best out there. He knows his ball, people.
Well, you're 100% right. That's exactly how I feel. I feel like we're about 45 minutes in this conversation. I'm like, oh, wow, like we're recording something, because we used to just do this without recording. We just talk a little football.
That's right.
So, yeah, this has been fun. We appreciate everybody who's listened in. Obviously Mick is in Vegas. He's going to be back. I think we'll be back at it tomorrow, but this was a great episode. We appreciate you once again, Jimmy, and we'll have to do this again soon, man.
Looking forward to it.